The mountains held their secrets well. Luke Carter had spent years in these woods, learning their rhythms and silences. But tonight, something was different. The forest was too quiet, its usual nocturnal symphony silenced as if the world held its breath. Standing on the weathered porch of his cabin, Luke scanned the tree line, his sharp gaze piercing the moonlit shadows. The wood beneath his boots was cool and familiar, grounding him in a way that his years as a soldier rarely had. The stillness broke with an unearthly sound, a shriek that cut through the air, sharp and alien. It clawed at his nerves, reverberating in his chest like the distant thunder of artillery. His head snapped toward the horizon, just in time to see a streak of light blazing across the sky. It wasn't a shooting star. The trajectory was too precise, the fiery trail too deliberate. His gut twisted as the light vanished behind the trees, the ground trembling seconds later with the force of an impact. Something had come down hard and fast, and it wasn't natural. Luke moved without hesitation. Years of training kicked in, his body responding instinctively. Grabbing his rifle and flashlight, he descended the porch steps, his boots crunching on the gravel path as he plunged into the forest. The rifle's weight was familiar in his hands, a relic from a life he had tried to leave behind. Yet here he was, slipping through the dense undergrowth as if he were back on patrol in some war-torn wilderness. The forest changed as he pressed deeper. The air grew heavier, tinged with smoke and an acrid metallic tang that stung his nostrils. Trees bowed under an unseen weight, their branches trembling as if in deference to something powerful. The shadows seemed thicker here, alive with anticipation. Luke's flashlight cut a narrow beam through the gloom, guiding him closer to the source of the crash. When he reached the clearing, he froze. The wreckage sprawled before him like the carcass of a fallen beast, twisted and smoldering. It was a ship, but unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its surface shimmered in the moonlight, a kaleidoscope of shifting colors that seemed to pulse with an internal rhythm. The metal looked alive, its sleek design marred by jagged tears and glowing blue fissures. Smoke rose in spirals, curling into the canopy above, and a faint hum vibrated through the air, low and persistent. Luke stepped closer, his rifle raised. His movements were deliberate, every sense on high alert. He scanned the wreckage, searching for signs of life or danger. Then he heard it, a faint sound carried on the breeze. A whimper, soft and almost human. He pivoted, his flashlight sweeping over the wreckage until it landed on them. At first, he wasn't sure what he was seeing. The woman lay slumped against the jagged remains of the ship, her body battered and bloodied. Her skin shimmered faintly, a rich, deep purple that seemed to catch and reflect the moonlight. Iridescent blood oozed from a gash on her temple, glowing softly as it trickled down her face. Her hair, a cascade of silvery lavender, framed her delicate features, but her expression was fierce despite her injuries. In her arms, she cradled a child, a girl no older than 5, with the same violet skin and glowing eyes that stared at him with a mix of fear and wonder. Luke's breath hitched. He'd expected danger, perhaps hostile creatures or advanced weaponry. What he found instead was a mother, shielding her child with the last of her strength. The woman's eyes snapped open, locking onto him. They burned with defiance, her body tensing despite her obvious pain. She shifted slightly, positioning herself between Luke and the child. "Hey," he said softly, lowering the barrel of his rifle. His voice was calm but firm, a tone he'd used countless times to de-escalate tense situations. "I'm not here to hurt you." The woman's gaze flicked to the weapon, then back to him. Her lips moved, forming words in a language that was utterly alien yet strangely melodic. The sound was beautiful, even in its desperation. She tried to push herself upright, but her body betrayed her, sagging against the wreckage. The child whimpered, clutching at her mother's torn clothing. Her wide eyes darted between Luke and the surrounding forest, as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. Luke crouched, setting his rifle aside but keeping it within reach. "You're hurt," he said, his tone steady. "Let me help." The woman's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across her face. She shook her head weakly, her grip tightening around the child. It wasn't just mistrust, it was fear. Luke had seen that look before in refugees, in families caught in the crossfire of wars they didn't start. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for her child. Luke's chest tightened. He pulled off his jacket, holding it out in a gesture of peace. "It's cold," he said, his voice softer now. "Take this. For her." The woman hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Luke stepped closer, draping the jacket over her shoulders. Up close, he could see the extent of her injuries. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale beneath its violet hue. She was running out of time. "We need to move," he said, glancing toward the forest. "This place isn't safe." The woman blinked at him, her gaze sharp despite her exhaustion. She spoke again, her voice low and urgent, but the words were lost on him. She gestured weakly toward the ship, then to the child. Luke frowned, trying to piece together her meaning. Was there something or someone else in the wreckage? A sound from the forest snapped him to attention. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but enough to set his nerves on edge. Something was coming. He turned back to the woman, urgency tightening his voice. "We have to go, now." She seemed to understand. With great effort, she shifted the child toward him. The little girl whimpered but didn't resist as Luke lifted her into his arms. She was light, her small body trembling against his chest. The woman tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Luke caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her with his free arm. The three of them moved as one, Luke's steps quick but careful. The forest seemed alive now, the shadows closing in, as if drawn by the crash. The hum from the ship grew fainter with every step, but the sense of danger lingered, gnawing at the edges of his mind. As they broke through the tree line and the cabin came into view, Luke's thoughts raced. Who were they? What had brought them here? And perhaps most pressing, what or who had caused their ship to fall? For now, those questions would have to wait. The only thing that mattered was survival. And as Luke carried them into the safety of his cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The nights grew colder, their silence now tinged with unspoken tension, as Luke Carter grappled with the realities of sharing his solitary cabin with beings from another world. The forest beyond his walls seemed unnaturally still, its usual nocturnal symphony replaced by an uneasy quiet. Animals had scattered, their instincts attuned to the unnatural presence Kara and Laura brought with them. Inside, however, the once familiar space pulsed with life he had neither anticipated nor fully understood. Kara sat by the fire, her posture poised yet weary, her violet skin shimmering faintly in the flickering light. Her markings, intricate geometric patterns etched into her skin, seemed alive, shifting subtly as if responding to her emotions. She rarely spoke, but her silver eyes carried a depth of expression that required no words. Her daughter, Laura, leaned into her side, clutching a carved piece of wood Luke had given her that morning. The child's luminous gaze flitted about the cabin, curious but cautious, as if waiting for the next unexpected twist in this new life. Luke stood by the small kitchen counter, scraping remnants of stew into a tin bowl. The rhythmic scrape of the spoon against the metal filled the space, a mundane sound anchoring him amidst the surreal reality of his new companions. He glanced at them from the corner of his eye, the sight still jarring despite the days they had shared. Their presence filled the room in ways silence never could, transforming his retreat into a reluctant sanctuary. Setting the bowl down, Luke turned toward Kara, his movements measured. He had learned quickly that sudden actions unsettled her. She had the bearing of someone who had lost too much, her every gesture taut with restrained vigilance. He crouched beside her, careful not to intrude on her space. "Eat," he said, nudging the bowl toward her. Kara hesitated, her eyes flicking to his hand before settling on his face. There was mistrust there, but also gratitude. Slowly she took the bowl, her long, slender fingers brushing the edge. Her movements were deliberate, the act of accepting the offering a clear message of tentative trust. Laura, however, wrinkled her nose at the stew, her small hands clutching her wooden toy tighter. Luke chuckled softly, the sound unexpected even to himself. "Not a fan, huh?" He turned toward the child. "What do you eat, then?" Kara tilted her head, watching him. She seemed to understand the question's intent but struggled to articulate a response. Instead, she gestured toward the symbols Luke had painted on the wooden boards scattered around the cabin. Rising gracefully, she moved to one near the door and traced the sign for tree. Her finger circled it, then tapped her lips. "Berries," Luke guessed. "Fruits?" Kara nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. Laura's small hand tugged at her mother's sleeve, her large eyes alight with anticipation. Luke grabbed his jacket. "All right, let's see what we can find." The forest was colder than it had been the night Kara's ship had fallen, the ground frosted over in delicate patterns that crunched softly underfoot. Luke led the way, his flashlight casting long beams through the trees. Kara followed closely, her steps almost silent, despite her injuries. Laura trailed behind, her fascination with every sound and shadow evident. She darted toward a patch of moss, then froze, staring intently at a small bird perched on a low branch. The animal remarkably didn't flee but cocked its head as if studying her in return. Luke paused, glancing back. She's a curious one. Kara's lips quirked into the faintest smile, an expression so fleeting it felt like a secret shared. She gestured for Laura to stay close, her hand brushing the child's head gently. The protective warmth in the gesture struck Luke in a way he hadn't expected. It reminded him of something long buried, a memory he couldn't quite grasp but felt deeply. They found a patch of winter berries after a short trek, their red orbs glowing faintly in the dim moonlight. Kara inspected them carefully, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she picked only the ripest ones. Laura mimicked her mother's actions, her small hands gathering a handful before presenting them proudly to Luke. He accepted the offering with exaggerated gratitude, drawing a giggle from the girl that echoed softly through the woods. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere shifted. The berries seemed to invigorate both mother and child, their moods lighter as they shared the meager bounty. Luke sat by the fire whittling a new toy for Laura. He had grown fond of the quiet rhythm of carving, the scrape of the blade against wood a grounding ritual amidst the chaos. Kara watched him closely, her gaze thoughtful. Finally, she pointed to his knife, then mimicked the motion of carving. Luke raised an eyebrow, handing the blade to her cautiously. She tested its weight before beginning to work on a small piece of wood. Her movements were unfamiliar but fluid, the shape she carved emerging slowly but deliberately. When she finished, she handed it back to him. It was a bird, its wings outstretched, as if mid-flight. Simple yet elegant, it captured the essence of the creature with remarkable clarity. Luke turned it over in his hands, impressed. "You've got a knack for this." Kara tilted her head, clearly not understanding his words, but the pride in his tone seemed to reach her. She nodded, a subtle acknowledgement that spoke more than words could. As the days stretched into weeks, a fragile rhythm emerged. Kara's strength returned, though she remained wary of the outside world. Laura, on the other hand, embraced the small wonders of the cabin and forest with growing enthusiasm. Luke found himself adapting, their presence shifting his solitary existence into something he hadn't realized he craved. But not all shifts were welcome. One evening, as Luke sharpened his axe by the fire, Kara froze. Her gaze snapped to the window, her markings flaring faintly as a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the room. Luke followed her line of sight but saw only the darkened forest. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Kara didn't respond but rose swiftly, pulling Laura close. The child whimpered, clutching her mother's leg as the hymn grew louder, a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very air. Luke grabbed his rifle, his pulse quickening. The sound wasn't natural, it carried a mechanical undertone, a deliberate purpose that set his instincts ablaze. Moments later, a beam of light pierced the forest, sweeping across the trees with chilling precision. Luke cursed under his breath, extinguishing the fire with a quick kick of his boot. He motioned for Kara and Laura to follow him into the smaller room at the back of the cabin, his makeshift storeroom turned sanctuary. Kara's breathing was shallow, her silver eyes wide with fear. Laura clung to her tightly, her small body trembling. Luke crouched by the door, rifle at the ready, his senses sharpened. Whatever was out there, it wasn't friendly. The hum grew louder, the beam of light passing over the cabin's front door. Luke's grip on the rifle tightened, his mind racing through every possible outcome. He had thought the crash was the end of something, but it was beginning to look like it had been only the start. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced across the cabin's modest interior. The rhythmic sound of Kara's carving tool scraped against a piece of salvaged wood, steady and purposeful. Luke Carter watched her from his chair near the window, his fingers absently tapping against the rifle balanced across his lap. He told himself he was keeping watch, looking for signs of the armored intruder that had attacked them days ago, but his attention often drifted inside, toward the two beings who had turned his isolated refuge into something unrecognizably alive. Kara sat at the table, her silvery eyes focused on the intricate design she was etching into the wood. The soft glow of her violet skin seemed to absorb the firelight, her markings shifting faintly, as if responding to her thoughts. The piece she was working on looked like a bird, its wings outstretched. But the design was distinctly alien, with angular curves and geometric accents that hinted at a culture far removed from Earth. At her feet, Laura hummed quietly, stacking wooden blocks into precarious towers. Her small hands moved with careful precision, her melodic hum filling the cabin with an otherworldly comfort. The child's energy seemed boundless, and yet she was cautious, always casting quick glances toward her mother or Luke, as if seeking reassurance. Luke found himself smiling faintly despite the heaviness in his chest. He shifted his weight, the chair groaning beneath him. The sound caught Kara's attention, and she glanced up, her expression softening. She said nothing, but the brief look of acknowledgement, a flicker of trust, was enough to stir something in Luke that he hadn't felt in years. "How's the project coming along?" he asked, his voice low but carrying across the quiet room. Kara tilted her head, considering his words. Though they had been working to bridge their language barrier, many of Luke's phrases still eluded her. Instead of answering, she held up the carving, her slender fingers turning it in the firelight. The bird's wings caught the glow, its shape delicate yet purposeful. Luke nodded, impressed. "Not bad, you're getting better at that." Her lips curved faintly, a gesture so subtle it might have been missed, but Luke had learned to read her quiet expressions. She placed the carving on the table, then gestured toward the rifle across his lap. Her silver eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze questioning. "I keep it close," he said, tapping the barrel, "just in case." Kara didn't seem reassured. She rose slowly, moving with the deliberate care of someone still recovering from injury, and approached the window. Her markings flared faintly as she peered into the forest, her posture tense. Luke followed her gaze but saw only the familiar outline of trees swaying gently in the wind. "They won't come back tonight," he said, though his grip on the rifle tightened. "Not this soon." Kara didn't reply, but the tension in her frame remained. She had told him little about the armored figure that had attacked them, only that it was one of many a hunter sent to track her and Laura. The details of why she was being pursued remained frustratingly unclear, though Luke suspected it was tied to the shimmering piece of alien tech she had hidden beneath the cabin floorboards. She hadn't explained its purpose, but the way she guarded it told him all he needed to know. It was dangerous, and it was important. Laura's tower toppled with a clatter, breaking the quiet. The child let out a soft gasp of surprise, her wide, glowing eyes darting to her mother. Kara turned immediately, her stern gaze softening as she knelt to comfort her daughter. Laura reached for her mother's hand, her small fingers curling around Kara's slender ones. Luke watched the exchange, something tightening in his chest. "She's tougher than she looks," he said, his voice soft. Kara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. She lifted Laura into her arms, cradling the child against her chest. Laura rested her head on her mother's shoulder, her hum returning, quieter now, like a lullaby. Luke set the rifle aside and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We need to talk about what happened," he said, his tone serious. "That thing that came after you, it's not just going to disappear. We need a plan." Kara sat down across from him, holding Laura close. Her silver eyes met his, their depths unreadable. She gestured toward the trap she had helped him construct earlier that week, then mimicked the act of setting it. "Traps won't stop them," Luke said, shaking his head. "Not for long. That thing was armored, fast. We need something stronger. A way to see them coming before they're on us." Kara's brow furrowed, her markings shifting subtly as she considered his words. She tapped her fingers against the table, then motioned toward the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards where the alien device lay. Luke stiffened. "That thing? No way," he said firmly. "You don't even know if it still works, and if it does, it might just bring more of them here." Kara's gaze hardened, and for a moment the tension in the room thickened, but then Laura stirred, her small hand reaching for the table. Kara's expression softened, and she nodded reluctantly, signaling her agreement to wait. Luke exhaled, relieved. "We'll figure something out," he said, "but for now we keep things quiet. Low profile." The rest of the evening passed in strained silence. Kara returned to her carving, her movements slower, more deliberate. Laura fell asleep in her mother's arms, her small frame rising and falling with each breath. Luke sat by the fire, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer carrying it alone. Later that night, as the fire burned low, Luke stood on the porch, staring out into the darkness. The forest was silent, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The intruder's attack had been a warning, a reminder that their fragile peace was temporary. Behind him, the cabin glowed faintly with the warmth of the firelight. Inside, Kara and Laura slept, their presence a quiet defiance against the dangers that lurked outside. Luke tightened his grip on the rifle, his jaw set. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain: he would fight to protect them. The forest shivered under an eerie silence, its nocturnal symphony stifled by a presence that did not belong. Luke Carter stood at the cabin's threshold, scanning the shadows that pooled beneath the towering pines. The chill in the air pricked at his skin, but his focus remained unwavering. Something was wrong. The usual calls of owls and rustling of small animals had vanished, leaving a stillness so oppressive it felt alive. Behind him, the cabin was dim, its fire reduced to faint embers glowing in the hearth. Kara sat near the window, her sharp, alien senses attuned to the shift in the air. Her translucent violet skin seemed to absorb the faint moonlight filtering through the cabin, her geometric markings glowing faintly, as if reacting to her tension. She glanced at Luke, her eyes betraying a knowing dread. "They've found us," she whispered. Though her words were spoken in her native tongue, their meaning was clear. Luke nodded, tightening his grip on the rifle slung across his chest. "Stay inside," he instructed, his voice firm and quiet. "Don't come out unless I call for you." Kara hesitated, her gaze lingering on him. Her reluctance was palpable, but she relented, motioning for Laura to follow her to the corner of the cabin. The child, small and luminous as a star, clung to her mother's side, her wide eyes darting between Kara and Luke. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She understood the gravity of the moment too well. Luke stepped outside, the cold seeping into his skin as he surveyed the clearing. His boots crunched against the frost-laden earth, each step a deliberate sound in the otherwise still night. He crouched low, his rifle at the ready, scanning the tree line. His military instincts, honed through years of combat, kicked in, every sense sharpened. A faint hum broke the silence, a mechanical vibration that sent a chill down his spine. He shifted his gaze toward the sound, and there between the trees, a faint shimmer caught the moonlight. Cloaked figures moved with deadly precision, their forms briefly visible as their stealth technology faltered under the forest's dense canopy. Inside the cabin, Kara worked swiftly. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she assembled makeshift defenses from the salvage pieces of her crashed vessel. She twisted wires, fusing alien energy cores with Luke's simple tools. A fragmented plasma conduit became a trip mine, and a damaged energy cell was rigged into a rudimentary EMP device. Every pulse of blue light emitted by her work felt like both a lifeline and a beacon. She glanced at Laura, who watched her mother in silence. "Stay hidden," Kara said softly, brushing a hand over her daughter's head. Laura nodded, clutching the small wooden animal Luke had carved for her, its presence a fragile comfort in the chaos. Kara stepped outside, carrying a sleek, hybrid weapon forged from the remnants of her ship. The staff-like device hummed faintly, its edges glowing with contained energy. She moved to stand beside Luke, her presence quiet but charged with determination. "They're here," Luke murmured, his eyes fixed on the shadows. Kara nodded. She didn't need to see them to feel the hunter's presence. The air itself seemed to pulse with their malice. The first hunter revealed itself in a burst of motion. Its cloaking flickered, revealing an insectoid form clad in segmented armor that gleamed like oil under the moonlight. It moved with inhuman speed, its multi-jointed limbs slicing through the air. But it miscalculated, stepping into one of Kara's traps. The energy mine detonated with a sharp crack, sending a surge of blue light coursing through its body. The creature screeched, its limbs convulsing as it collapsed to the ground. Luke didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, firing a precise shot that caught the second hunter in the shoulder. The alien staggered, its weapon arm sparking, but it recovered quickly, emitting a guttural growl. Before Luke could fire again, the third hunter charged, its blade like appendage cutting through the air. The impact knocked Luke to the ground, his rifle skidding out of reach. He rolled instinctively, avoiding the downward strike aimed at his chest. The hunter loomed over him, its eyes glowing with predatory intent. But before it could strike again, Kara intervened. Her staff hummed as she swung it with calculated precision, the energy-infused edge slicing into the hunter's armor. The creature reeled and Kara pressed her advantage, her movements fluid and unrelenting. She danced around the hunter, her strikes deliberate, each one driving it further back. Luke scrambled to his feet, retrieving his knife from his belt. The second hunter, injured but not incapacitated, advanced on Kara, its disruptor weapon glowing with deadly intent. Luke lunged, plunging the blade into the exposed joint at its side. The hunter screeched, its weapon discharging harmlessly into the ground as it collapsed. A sharp, high-pitched sound cut through the air. A drone, small and fast, zipped out from the trees. It locked onto the faint energy signal emanating from Laura inside the cabin. Kara's eyes widened in alarm, and she broke from the fight, racing toward the cabin. "Laura," she shouted, her voice raw with fear. Luke acted on instinct. He spun, unslinging the rifle from his shoulder, and fired. The shot missed, the drone's erratic movements making it impossible to hit. He dropped the rifle and grabbed his knife, his arm snapping forward in a practiced motion. The blade spun through the air, striking the drone dead center. Sparks flew as it crashed into the clearing, its energy core sputtering out. Kara reached the cabin, throwing open the door to find Laura unharmed but trembling. She pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice wavered. "It's over." Outside, Luke stood amidst the wreckage of the fight, his breath visible in the cold air. 2 hunters lay dead, their forms still and lifeless. The third had retreated into the forest, its blood marking its escape. He glanced at Kara as she stepped onto the porch, Laura clinging to her side. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of the battle hung heavy between them. "This isn't over," Luke said, his voice grim. "They'll send more." Kara nodded, her expression resolute. "Then we'll be ready." In that moment, amidst the quiet of the forest reclaiming its voice, an unspoken bond solidified between them. They were no longer just survivors. They were a team, a family bound not by blood but by the fierce determination to protect one another against whatever came next. The cabin stood as a flickering beacon in the deep stillness of the forest, its warm light spilling through the cracks in its wooden walls. Inside, the air was alive with the quiet rhythm, the crackle of the fire, the faint hum of alien technology Kara tinkered with, and the soft melodic humming of Laura as she stacked wooden blocks in front of the hearth. These sounds blended into a harmony that filled the once silent space Luke Carter had called his refuge. Luke leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Kara work at the small table. Her hands moved deftly, assembling a hybrid device from a combination of salvaged alien materials and human tools he had scavenged for her. Her violet skin shimmered in the warm light, the geometric patterns that etched her body glowing faintly as if responding to her focus. Every so often she would tilt her head, her silvery eyes narrowing in concentration, and make an adjustment that resulted in a faint hum or spark of light. Luke crossed his arms, smirking faintly. "So what is that? Some kind of space blender?" Kara looked up, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "A shield, small but strong." Her words, though halting, carried pride. The melodic cadence of her voice softened the sharp edges of her alien accent. Luke raised an eyebrow, pushing off the counter to step closer. "Shield, huh? Planning for the next time those hunters come knocking?" Kara nodded, her expression serious. "Always planning. Never not ready." Her response struck Luke, reminding him how her life had been shaped by survival. "I get it," he said quietly. "You can't let your guard down even for a second." Kara paused, her gaze locking onto his. "But here safer," she said. "Because of you." Luke's breath caught. He looked away, suddenly finding the floorboards interesting. "It's not just me. You've done your part too." Kara tilted her head, her smile returning. She reached across the table and tapped the device. "Together." The word hung in the air, simple but profound. Luke nodded, a small, unspoken agreement passing between them. As the evening wore on, Luke found himself outside on the porch, the cool night air biting at his skin. He leaned against the railing, gazing up at the vast expanse of stars. The weight of the past few weeks sat heavy on his shoulders. Kara and Laura's arrival, the battles with the hunters, and the growing bond he couldn't ignore. He heard the creak of the cabin door and turned to see Kara stepping out. She held a mug in her hands, its steam curling into the cold air. Her violet skin glowed faintly under the moonlight, and her silver eyes seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken thoughts. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, shifting to make room for her on the porch. Kara shook her head, stepping closer. She offered him the mug, and he accepted it without hesitation. The drink was warm and faintly sweet, a blend of human and alien ingredients she had concocted. He took a sip, savoring the unexpected taste. "Good," he said, handing it back to her. Kara sat down beside him, her gaze lifting to the stars. For a moment they sat in silence, the only sound the faint rustling of the forest. Then she spoke. My people saw stars as guides, she said, her voice soft. They told us where to go, who we are. Luke glanced at her, intrigued. Like maps. Kara shook her head. More. They speak to us, tell stories, help us understand. Luke followed her gaze, trying to see the stars as she did. And what are they telling you now? Kara's markings flared briefly, her lips pressing into a thoughtful line. That I am not alone. Luke felt a strange tightness in his chest. You're not, he said after a long pause. Kara turned to him, her expression softening. You feel the same? Luke hesitated, the weight of her question settling heavily on him. But as he looked at her at the strength and vulnerability etched into every line of her face, he knew the answer. Yeah, he said, I do. Her smile was small but radiant, a glimmer of light in the quiet darkness. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of energy. Kara and Luke worked side by side, repairing parts of the cabin and expanding their defenses. Their conversations, once stilted and cautious, grew more natural, filled with shared jokes and small moments of understanding. One afternoon, as they worked to reinforce the garden fence, Kara asked a question that caught Luke off guard. Humans, how do they show love? Luke froze mid-swing, the hammer in his hand hovering over a nail. He turned to her, his expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. Why do you ask? Kara shrugged, her gaze fixed on the piece of wood she was holding. Your way's different. I want to understand. Luke set the hammer down, leaning against the fence. Well, it depends on the person, he said, choosing his words carefully. Some people are loud about it, big gestures, big words. Others, not so much. They show it in quieter ways. Small things. Kara looked at him, her eyes searching his face. And you? Luke hesitated, the question hitting closer than he expected. I guess I'm more of a quiet kind of guy. Kara smiled faintly. I see. She didn't say more, but Luke couldn't shake the feeling that her question had been more than curiosity. That evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Luke found himself sitting closer to Kara than usual. Laura was asleep, her small frame curled up under a blanket on the floor. The quiet was comforting, but Luke felt a need to fill it. Kara, he said, his voice low. Can I ask you something? She looked up from the device she was working on, her expression open. Yes. Do your people have something like marriage? A way of saying this person matters more than anyone else? Kara tilted her head, her markings glowing faintly. We bond, deeply. It is not words. It is knowing. Luke nodded, his chest tightening. And how do you know? Kara smiled, a warmth in her gaze that made his pulse quicken. When you see them and you feel home. Luke swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to his hands. Home, he repeated softly. Kara reached out, her fingers brushing his. Yes, home. In that moment, Luke felt something shift. The cabin wasn't just a place anymore. It was a feeling, a connection, and it was sitting right in front of him. As the fire burned low, Kara began to hum a melody soft and haunting. Luke listened, the sound weaving through the air like a thread connecting them. He didn't recognize the song, but it didn't matter. It was hers, and that made it enough. Teach me, he said suddenly. Kara blinked, surprised. Teach. The song, he said, leaning closer. Teach me your song. Kara's smile grew, and she began to hum again, this time slower, her voice guiding him. Luke joined in hesitantly, his deep tones blending with her higher, melodic notes. The harmony was imperfect, but it was theirs. As the song faded, Kara placed a hand over his. Together, she said. Luke nodded, his voice steady. Together. For the first time in years, Luke Carter felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was living. And for the first time, he knew he didn't have to do it alone. The air in the cabin hung heavy with anticipation, an unspoken tension settling over the small family. Kara stood by the window, her silver eyes reflecting the early morning light filtering through the trees. Her slender fingers hovered over the wristband she had salvaged from a wrecked vessel, its faint blue glow pulsing steadily. It had been weeks since the device had picked up the distress signal, a faint, desperate call from her people. Now the pulse was stronger, more insistent, like a heartbeat reaching across the stars. Behind her, Luke Carter leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. His rugged face was calm, but his furrowed brow betrayed his unease. It's getting closer, isn't it? He asked, breaking the silence. Kara nodded, Yes, they are not far. Maybe 2 days. Laura sat on the floor, cradling the small wooden bird Luke had carved for her. The child's luminous eyes flicked between her mother and Luke, her expression solemn. She was too young to fully understand the gravity of the decision looming over them, but she felt it nonetheless. Kara turned to Luke, her voice soft but steady. We must go. Luke's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He had known this moment was coming. Ever since Kara first revealed the signal, it was the last tether to her world, a chance to reconnect with whatever remained of her people. But it also meant leaving behind the fragile sanctuary they had built together. You're sure it's safe? He asked, his tone cautious. What if it's a trap? Kara hesitated, her markings dimming slightly as she considered his words. I do not know, she admitted, but I must find out. Luke nodded, his expression softening. Then we'll go, all of us. Kara's eyes widened slightly, surprise flashing across her face. You would leave your home? Luke glanced around the cabin, the place that had been his refuge for so many years. The walls, once a shield against the world, now felt like a cage. He looked back at her, his voice resolute. This stopped being just my home a long time ago. The preparations began immediately. Kara worked tirelessly, modifying the remaining alien technology to help them navigate the journey. She constructed a portable energy shield, a compact device designed to protect them from potential attacks. Luke gathered supplies, food, water, and the tools he had relied on for years in the wilderness. He moved with purpose, his military training guiding every decision. Laura, sensing the gravity of the moment, helped in her own way. She organized their meager belongings into neat piles, her small hands working diligently. Luke smiled as he watched her, a pang of pride mixing with the ache of uncertainty. Good job, kid, he said, ruffling her hair. She beamed up at him, her innocent joy a balm to his troubled thoughts. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest, the family gathered around the fire for one last night in the cabin. Kara hummed a soft melody, a song from her homeworld that resonated with an aching beauty. Laura leaned against her mother, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. Luke sat silently, staring into the flames as the weight of their decision settled over him. You're not scared? He asked suddenly, breaking the stillness. Kara looked at him, her gaze steady. I am afraid, she admitted, but I am more afraid of doing nothing. Luke nodded, his respect for her growing with every word. You're braver than me. Kara smiled faintly. You are wrong. The journey began at dawn, the family stepping into the forest with a mix of determination and trepidation. Kara led the way, her wristband glowing faintly as it guided them toward the signal. Luke followed closely, his rifle slung over his shoulder and his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger. Laura walked between them, clutching her carved bird tightly. The forest was alive with sound, but Luke noticed the subtle shifts, birds taking flight, animals darting away as they moved deeper into the wilderness. The hunters had taught him to notice such signs, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. We're not alone, he said quietly, his hand tightening on his weapon. Kara stopped, her markings flaring briefly as she scanned the area. They are close, she said, her voice low, but they do not know who we are. Luke frowned. Let's keep it that way. As night fell, they set up camp in a small clearing, using Kara's energy shield to create a protective barrier. Laura fell asleep quickly, her small frame curled up against her mother. Luke sat at the edge of the camp, his rifle resting across his lap as he kept watch. Kara joined him, sitting close enough that their shoulders brushed. You do not rest, she observed. Can't, he replied, his voice quiet. Not until I know you're safe. Kara placed a hand on his, her touch light but grounding. We are safe because of you. Luke looked at her, his heart tightening. It's not just me, he said. We're a team. Kara smiled, her markings glowing softly. Together. The final leg of the journey brought them to a hidden valley, its lush greenery a stark contrast to the dense forest they had left behind. At its center stood a towering structure of alien origin, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. The signal pulsed stronger now, a steady rhythm that resonated in the air. Kara approached cautiously, her breath hitching as the structure began to shift. Panels slid open, revealing an interior bathed in soft, ethereal light. A figure emerged, humanoid but unmistakably alien, its form adorned with markings similar to Kara's. Kara, the figure said, its voice layered and melodic. You survived. Tears welled in Kara's eyes as she stepped forward, her voice trembling. I did, and I brought family. The figure's gaze shifted to Luke and Laura, a look of curiosity and understanding crossing its face. Then you are welcome. Luke exhaled, the tension in his body easing for the first time in days. He looked at Kara, a smile tugging at his lips. Looks like we made it. Kara turned to him, her eyes shining. Because we are strong. As they stepped into the light, Luke felt a strange sense of peace. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time he believed they had a future, one built on trust, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of a family forged in the stars.